pollinated. They are primarily wind pollinated, but they're also hosts for different butterflies. So caterpillars can lay their eggs on grasses as well. So every single species, native species, can support pollinators. It's more about having a diversity of different plants from different plant families. The more plants you have, the more different pollinators you can support. So you want to have plants for larval phases and juvenile insects, because insects have different life phases. And you want to have plants also for nectar-bearing plants for the adult. Usually it's the adult forms that feed on the nectar. For example, a butterfly, once they have gone through the chrysalis and emerged, then they're going to feed on nectar. But prior to that, as a caterpillar, they're directly feeding usually on the leaves. And usually, often the host plants are different than what they feed on as well. So there's that kind of thing. So a good idea there is just to either, if you're really interested in butterflies, then do a little bit of research about butterflies in our area, learn what you can, and then choose plants to support the juvenile phase and the adult phase. And then you also want to maybe have blooms throughout the season. That's a very common and typical way you can support pollinators, is by having plants blooming from, late April until late September, early October. And that will support different pollinators, because different pollinators emerge at different times of the year. So just some recommendations there. The second question we received in advance was, which milkweed should I grow to support monarch butterflies? So monarch butterflies are a great example of a species that has a specific relationship with a plant. So the monarch butterfly caterpillars exclusively feed on Asclepias species milkweed plants. They can feed on multiple species of milkweeds. So depending on where you are living, I recommend choosing milkweeds historically native to your region or nearby region. But any milkweed native to North America can support monarch butterflies. There's some research, because not here, we're in Canada where it's cold, but folks coming further south in the US, they can grow milkweeds from other continents. And there's some research that although monarch butterfly caterpillars can feed on those milkweeds as well, there's some negative effects. So nutritionally, there can be some effects. Milkweeds have toxic compounds that help to make the monarch caterpillars toxic themselves. So sometimes the compound amount could be toxic towards the caterpillars, is one avenue of potential negative effect, or also an inappropriate level of compounds for the monarch butterfly. And it can also make monarch butterflies more susceptible to disease. So the caterpillars, I believe, in particular. So it's still always ideal to follow what nature has prescribed, but it is possible for monarchs to lay eggs on other species introduced. But we're not promoting that. We're promoting bringing back species that were historically on our landscapes to support the maximum number of species and wildlife. So that is it for the pre-sent questions. So I'm ready to receive some chat questions. So Megan, that's on you to let me know what's going on here.
Yeah, so our first question here is it better to start a pollinator garden with seeds or plants?
Wonderful question. It's really up to you. There's pros and cons. I would say, first of all, regardless, if you're starting a new garden, I do recommend starting with annuals in that first year, so you get some blooms year one, and you can already be starting to support different bees and butterflies before your perennials get going. Because remember, most perennials do not bloom until their second year, and for some of our more finicky or unique long-lived species, it can take several years. So wild hollyhock might take 3 to 5 years to bloom. In my experience, 3 has been sufficient. If you're growing something even more specialized, like a wood lily, those can take 7 years to bloom. So absolutely, you want something in the meantime. So I do recommend having annuals, biennials, to sort of fill in your garden while you're getting started. So those plants won't live a long time, but they'll provide support along your journey. Now, seed can be more cost effective, but it does take more time. So You have to grow them, keep them going, establish them, and so forth. The other thing, some species of seed are very challenging to grow, or some species are the dormancy, if you were at last in November, we had a Q&A on starting seeds, and that we really went into that and talked about how dormancy is a concern with native species. So for example, we just got some wild sarsaparilla to germinate. It took 3 years. So now I'm not to discourage you, but I'm just acknowledging that if you want wild sarsaparilla, you're better off ordering the plants from us than trying to germinate them yourself. So that's the value of getting the plants from us. Some of these difficult to grow species is we're putting the work in. We're monitoring the seeds for 2 to 3 years and drying them and remoistening and drying and remoistening and putting them in the fridge and taking them out of the fridge. We're doing all that work. It's actually a great bargain if you think about it, if you're paying $6 to $7 for a plant and you think about all of the background labor that went into from identifying the plant to harvesting the seed, cleaning the seed, and then preparing that for germination. But that being said, there's lots of accessible species that I know you guys can germinate. Harebell, very easy to germinate, just need to surface sow the seed. Fireweed, very easy to germinate, just need to surface sow the seed because they're tiny seeds. Yarrow is easy to germinate, although folks from the Alberta Native Bee Council informed me yarrow is not a favorite of bees. So it's more for, flies prefer this is something new I learned last year. I'm not an entomologist, by the way, so I'm just, I'm learning as I go, just like you guys. So the flat-topped flowers are better for flies, and so are bee flies and syrphid flies and pollinating flies. Those cute little hover flies. Some people think they sting, but they're very harmless creatures. So yeah, so if you have the patience and time, then and seed is great. Or if you have budget constraints, seed can be definitely more cost effective, but you need to be able to put in the time and have that effort. So you can see where there's pros and cons. With the live plants, you can just plop them in the ground, water them. After a few months of watering, maybe a fall watering before winter sets in, you're good to go. You've got your plants set in. In some cases, we've already overwintered the plants, so you may get some small blooms in year 1. I say small because it does take time for those plants to establish. So you do need a bigger budget for the live plants, but you get a little bit faster results, and you're going to be getting a different species than you can get in seed, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's so many ways, and you can do a combination of both. Overall, I would definitely keep in mind that any garden takes time. It's never an instant result. And the same with a native plant garden, it does take time. So I definitely recommend for clients, if they want to do their whole yard, I say dig piece by piece, right? You don't have to do it all overnight. Be patient. And even when you start producing your own plants, you can even allow them to self-seed or collect their seed and sow it. The beautiful thing is plants keep on giving and giving and giving, and their propagules keep going. So once you have that started, and you can allow that gift becomes part of what you're doing and can spread out into your projects, and you can share that with others as well. All right, I'm ready for the next question.
Okay, so our next question here is, are there any seed mixes that you know that are more pollinator focused?
So this year or last year, we did launch a bee pollinator mix and a butterfly pollinator mix, specifically focusing on some of our favorite pollinator specific species. So we chose for the bee mix, we chose flowers that we knew that had a mix of flowering types. So there's again, I'm rudimentary on my insects. So please, if you know more than me, I forgive me if I make any errors, but there's long tongue bees and there's short tongue bees. There's all different types of bees. There's solitary bees, bumblebees, leafcutter bees. So most are solitary, from my understanding, in Alberta. Or I know there's folks maybe coming from other areas, but I'm located here in Alberta, so I will focus my information on what I know. But so we put a range of different flowering types. So for aster family, for example, has shallow nectaries. So a short-tongued bee can access that type of flower versus we put in some bee balm, Monarda fistulosa. Those are deep nectaries. Plants in the mint family have deep nectaries. Usually these patterns are consistent among families within a family, although there are exceptions. But so those deep nectaries can be accessed by different types of insects, butterflies, moths. If you ever see them, they have these long tongue. It looks like a long tongue, right, where they suck up the nectar, and it's like a little straw almost. So they have those long mouth parts that can specifically feed on certain types of flowers. There are moths. I mean, there's some fascinating research out there on moths and their flowers that they have evolved with. Some flowers have nectaries that are 5, 10 centimeters long, that the tongue has to go all the way down to the end. Some orchids, for example, are great examples of that, or some in the evening primrose family. They have these super long tongues that have, evolved with these moths so that they can feed on that. So, and that's a digression. But so we have that mix where we chose plants that we knew could be fed on by diverse species of bees that bloomed at different times. It's definitely not exhaustive. It's a fun way to help support folks. We put that mix together. Same with the butterfly mix. We put both nectar bearing flowers as well as some key host plants. So we put in slender nettle in that mix, in the butterfly mix. And why slender nettle? Many people don't think of including nettle in their plantings because they sting, but they're an excellent, excellent host plant for butterflies. So last summer, we got Milbert's tortoiseshell butterfly hosts, butterfly caterpillars on our nettle in our garden. And I had been wanting this for years. So I've been waiting and waiting for my butterfly to lay her eggs on my nettle, and it finally happened. So that was really cool, and we took lots of photos and we watched them grow. And so even though nettle is a wind pollinated plant, it's a really critical host plant. Millet's tortoiseshell is the most common and famous example, but there are other. I have sometimes it's beside me. I have a butterfly book guide for Alberta. It's not exhaustive because we don't actually know all the host plants of all the Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera are butterflies and moths. So there's about 150 species of butterfly native to Alberta, but over 2,000 species of moths. Now, not all of them pollinate as adults, but they all have host plants that they need, and they all provide really critical food for different wildlife. And so, anyway, so you might not think to include nettle, but and the other butterflies are just as showy. The other species, I can't remember them off the top of my head, besides the Milbert's tortoiseshell, which is a very handsome orange brown showy butterfly. So nettle has a few other species that's the preferred host, which is a very clever, I think, because in a way the nettle is protecting them. Herbivores are avoiding nettle because of the stinging hairs, and so what a great evolutionary relationship to have. And then the caterpillars perhaps are protected by the virtues of the plant itself. So we included nettle in that mix. We also included cow parsnip. Cow parsnip is a specific anything sometimes some butterflies and moths have families they like to lay eggs on, and so that's a species that the Anis swallowtail butterfly has been observed on. I know one of the members of the Edmonton Native Plant Society, she found a swallowtail butterfly caterpillar on her cow parsnip. So we've included that species as well. So those are the specific mixes, but it's just a drop in the bucket for what we're able to achieve, because as I say, every single species supports different life out there. So, again, choose plants that are historic to your region or near region, or just explore, surrounding areas if you want to try something. If there's an alpine one that catches your eye and you really want to put it in, you may still support local pollinators as well, because I think it is a very complex subject, because with human impact, pollinator ranges and plant ranges are changing. And so, for example, this is only anecdotal. I always encourage people to, if they're going for supporting the environment, to choose plants native to their region or nearby regions. But I found it really interesting that the police car moths, whose preferred host is lungwort, tall lungwort, Mertensia paniculata, are laying their eggs on these invasive forages. So I'm seeing police cardinals way out here, which is pretty far from the Rocky Mountains where lungwort is native. But because there's so much invasive forage, now I'm not promoting invasive forage, I'm just illustrating the fact that with human impact, these things are changing. So having something native, even if it's from a neighboring ecoregion, is still probably better than having something that pollinators can't use, because it is a complex issue and it's dynamic and changing. I hope that makes sense. So yeah. All right, next, I'm ready for the next one.
All right, so our next question is it enough to just plant native plants and hope insects and other pollinators show up?
Yeah, I think you will be pleasantly surprised. I certainly have, definitely, that just planting native plants will attract different species. I'm sure you will be surprised too at the different species you can attract, even in an urban area. We used to live in Calgary, in an urban area, and we had so many different species of solitary bees and bumblebees. Listen, I can't identify all the different bees, but we saw quite a few different kinds. Now, definitely in a rural area or near a natural area, you might see species that you don't see in a very disturbed area. For example, if you are in an urban area that's very dense and there's very few natural areas, or if you're in an agricultural area district, but there's very little native habitat anywhere around, you may not be able to have access to species. Whereas if you're bordering a park, if you're bordering a natural area, or if you're nearby, and then there's different distances that pollinators can travel as well. And some can travel kilometers depending on the species. So I'm not going to, again, that's not my expertise, so I'm not going to try to tease that apart more. But again, you can learn a little bit more about, if you're a species that you're really keen to learn more about and you want to support them, you can do a little bit more research, like how far can this bee travel, and etc. But absolutely, it is enough just to plant those plants. But for sure, I think in an urban area, and that's where projects like the David Suzuki butterfly wave project is about. It's about the idea of creating wildlife corridors or insect corridors. So the more people in a community that put native plants in, the more connectivity there will be between these different sites as well as within natural areas. And so we are actively creating space. We are actively creating habitat. This is something active and proactive we are choosing to do to support life and support biodiversity. That's the amazing thing about doing this. It's a super positive and it's a super proactive approach. And we're not just doing it for ourselves, but for the future as well. And as more people get involved, the more we can do, the more we'll see biodiversity increasing. And I do recommend like apps like iNaturalist to help you take photos of the insects you're finding in your garden, and to help you build relationships with connectivity where you live, and to get expert support to help you figure it out. So a lot of the insects I see out, if I have time, I'll put them on iNaturalist. And that's how I've helped to identify and learn some of the species I've seen, is to get that expert feedback. Yeah. I'll take one more question and then I'm going to do some announcements. And then, as I said, we're happy to stay till 12:45 if needed.
All right, so we've got what shrubs can you recommend for urban spaces that are fast growing and can provide habitat for insects?
Great question. Well, definitely willows are probably some of the fastest growing species. They do like moist areas, but they can do fine in a drier yard. We have pussy willow, but sometimes we have other willows. Some research done by Doug Ptolemy and Associates has pinpointed the Salicaceae, so willows and poplars, as being keystone species. 20% of Lepidoptera, according to his work and the folks he works with. A recent paper came out a couple of years ago, and they were saying 20% of Lepidoptera lay their eggs on willow and poplar. So there you go. You're already supporting. Those are keystone shrubs, fast growing, and fairly easy to work with. A lot of the myths, I know people don't always want poplars. Ken Wright came up with a cultivar, a registered cultivar, Pascapoo poplar, which is a male poplar that stays small and doesn't really spread very much. So a lot of the ideas of poplar roots going into sewage and stuff, I think there's a lot of misinformation from my understanding around that, how much damage they actually cause, but they are self-pruning and they do lose their limbs and so forth. So I do recommend plants like the Pascapoo, which are a little bit more tame poplars if you're concerned about plants spreading too much. I mean, aspen spreads a lot, so they're great for dry sites, but it might be too much for a small or urban garden. Other plants like Shepherdea canadensis, I really like. They're not fast growing, but both species of Shepherdea argentea and canadensis bloom in like late April. So they're going to be supporting early pollinating insects. I've seen bees, native bees, and also even honeybees utilizing those as some of the very first flowers to emerge. They're coming out around the same time as crocus. So that's a really great opportunity as well. So, but not super fast growing. I think wolf willow is a little bit more fast growing once established, but all those three species have specific associations with bacteria, native bacteria that fix nitrogen, as well as mycorrhizal fungi. And I do believe this is anecdotal, but based on my observation and client feedback, I think that obviously moisture will impact how fast plants grow too. So water your shrubs if you want them to grow faster. But anyways, the absence of those microorganisms may affect the growth of your plants. So they may not grow as fast or as rapidly as a result of having. So you can, one recommendation, this is again experimental, but you can inoculate if you're having trouble with a plant, some of your native plants, try and get a bit of wild soil where the wild plant grows, even if it's just a teaspoon, and sprinkle it around and try and re-inoculate your urban lot with some wild bacteria and fungi that might help improve the health of the soil. So, but this is experimental, but it's just if you're struggling with getting a plant to really thrive, that's something I would look into, and we kind of play with it. But again, you're just kind of, it's like a magic box, like it's a cauldron. I'm going to throw in this, see what happens. We're just trying to troubleshooting because we have a lot to learn about how to propagate these species. There's a long way to go. It's 12:26, so I'm just going to do some announcements before I continue on with the questions. But as I said, we're more than happy to stay until 12:45. So just some quick announcements. And if folks have to go at 12:30, you will receive a recording so you can listen to the rest of the questions after. So no worries there. So just quickly, we do have a website, ALCLA nativeplants.com. So for additional information on growing native plants, we also have an online shop where you can order native seeds and plants for pickup or shipping. We currently have a promotion going on for new newsletter subscribers. So you can save $10 on orders of $100 or more. You can sign up to the newsletter on our website. In addition, if you join the newsletter, it's a weekly newsletter. You will get access to product updates, exclusive discounts, event notifications, and educational information about native plants. We are hosting our next online webinar, Planning a Native Plant Garden, on Wednesday, January 28th. That's next week, starting at 7 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. This is in Mountain Standard Time. This is a ticketed event where you can learn how to create a functional and beautiful native plant garden suited to your space and goals. We'll explore site assessment, design, including layering plants for structure and bloom succession, and as well as creating habitat for pollinators and wildlife. So this will be a slideshow, I'll have photos and so forth. So we have full price tickets around about 25 plus fees, and then we have a $10 discounted one for students and folks who need a bit of assistance in that regard. We also have several upcoming live events. So the Lacombe District Garden Club is hosting the first CD Saturday of the year on January 31st. Saturday, January 31st at the Lacombe Memorial Center in Lacombe, Alberta from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. So we will be there in person selling seeds. If you are local to the area, please join us. We'd be happy to chat and answer questions there. For friends in Saskatoon, we will be live at the Remind Modern Art Gallery on Saturday, February 7th from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m., hosting a drawing and seating workshop with artist Alana Bartol as part of the exhibit Great Plains series, Points of Return, Spaces of Departure, showing until March 15th. This is also a ticketed event, but I believe it's quite a reduced price for these. This type of workshop is subsidized by the gallery. And then the final in-person event coming up soon is we are collaborating with Ruby's Healing Garden for fibers, food, and medicine, getting to know nettle on Tuesday, February 17th at 6 p.m. in Calgary at the Scandinavian Center. This workshop will teach you how to make your own fiber with plants and will include an in-depth exploration of nettle, which I already touched on. It's great for butterflies, and includes a tea tasting, growing tips, edible use with recipes. If you ever made nettle soup, I highly recommend it. It's really yummy. And traditional medicinal properties. So if anyone doesn't know, I do have a master's degree in herbal medicine from England. So I know a lot about how to use these plants as medicine. So I will happily share that with you and that event. And then the next free lunch hour Q&A is part of a series. All events are free, and the next one will be Establishing Native Plants on February 18th, 2026, again at noon. And even if you can't make it, you can get a recording if you're interested. That one will focus on establishment, including transplanting, watering, weeding, and helping native plants thrive during their critical first few years. You can also follow us on social media at ALCLA Native Plants on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. But we mainly post most frequently on Facebook and Instagram. So I will, when you get the follow-up email with the recording, I will include links to all those events. So if you are interested, it will be there as well. So I'm ready to continue on with the questions, Megan.
All right. So our next question is it true that 90% of pollinators have specific plant buddies?
Yes. So from my understanding, from the sources I've seen, including the Xerces Society, which is a not-for-profit supporting pollinators in the United States, as well as what I've heard from the Alberta Native Bee Council, these are both organizations that focus on evidence-based care for pollinators and promotion of pollinators, have both told me the same thing, that's our understanding today. 90% of insects have specific relationships with native plants. Yes.
All right. So next one, we've got a couple questions about urban planting for shade gardens that will attract pollinators.
So coming off the top of my head, columbine is a lovely one. They're very drought tolerant and easy to grow. They have a deeper nectary, so they're great for bees, potentially moths as well, and long-tongued bees, I believe, could be a pollinator for columbine, from my understanding, as well as hummingbirds. That's a nice one about the columbine, is you can attract hummingbirds as well. So they have a deep nectary, and that hanging flower is really very specific for especially butterflies, and hummingbirds I think are probably the main pollinators for that one. So those are some examples. Baneberry, we have recently figured out how to germinate and grow those plants. It was a bit of trouble, trial and error to get those to survive beyond a seedling form. They're not huge pollinator plants, but again, everything is every single plant offers something. So from my understanding, geometrid moths, so if you've ever seen those moths that look like inchworms, they're so cool. That's a geometrid moth. They prefer to eat the seeds of baneberry, and I felt really bad. I've collected baneberry seed and I've opened them and found not only are all my seeds eaten, but I've disturbed some poor little moths who have been eating them. So I feel bad. I have accidentally killed some insects, many I suppose, along the journey of collecting seeds, but that's part of it, I guess, because we're competing for the same things, I guess. But yeah, that's why it's important to sustainably harvest and not take everything, right? we want to leave some for everyone who needs it. Yeah, so and then I believe the pollen, from my understanding, beetles and flies prefer to eat the pollen of that particular flower. I don't think they're nectar bearing though. And then Thalictrum, they also have male and female flowers. That particular species, great shade plant, great in dry sites, more of a foliage plant. And I haven't done research on which pollinators specifically want to use it, but I'm sure there's different, I have no doubt that there's different species. Just I don't know specifically which ones off the top of my head. Those are just some of the Shade-bearing plants. Well, one of my favorites is the showy aster, late blooming. So it's great to have that late blooming plant. They love shade. Now, we've been finding where if we've been cultivating them in a dry site, maybe the seed is perhaps could be less viable. So I do find that species, depending on the moisture of the year, the seed viability can vary. But I believe that's my preliminary hypothesis on what's going on with that one. But so yeah, but that's neither here nor there. So that's a great one. Again, it's aster family, shallow nectary, and one thing that's really nice about late season bloomers is that they can support insects on the fringe, the margins of the season, and that's where if it's a generalist feeder, they're not going to, a lot of the ornamentals are not blooming late, so you can really support a lot of different insects that way by having something available later in the season. So this is a couple off the top of my head. We do have a database on our website where you can search for like shade and dry, and that can help you to select. Or if it's, I don't know if that was part shade. I mean, part shade, you can have broader spectrum of species, because even things like bee balm, Monarda fistulosa, they can handle a part shade dry environment. They don't mind that as well. So a lot of different options. This is some. There's a lot more possibilities, but yeah, I'll keep it brief so I can answer more questions. Okay, Megan, I'm ready for the next one.
All right. So this person's asking if you have any specific recommendations for plants that support the largest range of pollinators, or any endangered pollinators that you can think of.
Okay, so off the top of my head, first of all, milkweed, monarchs are now added to the Species at Risk Act in Canada since 2023. And, the Western population has declined by 99.9% since the 1980s. So while we may not see them in our area yet that often, historically they were here. So that's an endangered species that we can support very specifically by having milkweed available for them. And then, sorry, Megan, what were so there was endangered?
Yeah, so endangered species, and which plants support the largest range of pollinators. So the most, yeah.
Thank you. So, someone mentioned, okay, so anyways, I'm seeing the chats pop up, but I'll just, so keystone species that I'm aware of, again, I mentioned the willow for caterpillars. In particular, goldenrods are considered a keystone species. Megan was telling me she was reading about gumweed as some keystone species. I think plants like bee balm have a huge range. I know I've read that some sphinx moths can lay their eggs on bee balm, but we've seen a lot of different species be able to utilize the nectar. I'm really impressed with giant hyssop as well. This is just my own observation. The different species and sunflowers. I've seen a huge variety of different species of bees. In particular, we've seen solitary bees, leaf-cutting bees, carpenter bees, bumblebees of all kinds, just loving the sunflowers as well. So those are some that are coming to me on top of my head that I know are keystone species, that there's been some information published about it. And I saw someone put in the chat the gypsy cuckoo bumblebee is an endangered species. I don't know who their preferred food plants are. I know that the city of Calgary found one when they put in a pollinator boulevard, and the photo they showed was of a liatris, blazing star. So they were feeding on that, but I don't know enough about that species. The gypsy cuckoo bumblebee, though, is a parasitic bumblebee. So you need to be supporting bumblebee habitat before you can be supporting gypsy cuckoo bumblebee habitat. So because the queen gypsy cuckoo bumblebee, it's amazing. She kills the queen of another bumblebee and then poses as the new queen, and then the workers kind of believe that she's the new queen, and then she replaces the eggs with her eggs. It's pretty cool. So you can see how these networks of life are incredibly complex. So Yeah, and so how do you support bumblebees? They don't make their own nest. You need to actually be allowing mice to live, because bumblebees, you can have different kinds. Okay, there's ground nesting bumblebees, there's bumblebees in logs and in trees. There's different types, but some types of bumblebees are attracted to ground nesting, and they particularly love to use mouse dens, right? One Megan from the Edmonton Alberta Native Bee Council, she's like, if you put some mouse material in your bee box, because you can make a bee box, so like leftovers from a mouse nest, that will attract bumblebees because the smell attracts them. So that just illustrates how interwoven these relationships are. So yeah, it's also understanding the relationships that you're trying to support. So it isn't just enough to have, yeah, plants is one thing, but you need to have water is important, bare soil for insects who need that. Not using pesticides is huge. Don't use pesticides, avoid use of chemicals, harsh chemicals. We recommend leaving a portion wild, like don't break up all the leaves. Leave some areas there because some insects overwinter. A lot of butterflies overwinter as adults, so they overwinter in leaf litter. So if we put all that stuff into a bag and then throw it away or send it to the compost, we're also throwing away a bunch of insects with that material as well. And so leave some behind. We need to actually know how to give space and not take up all the space. That's really critical too. Yeah. Okay. I think I can probably fit in 2 or 3 questions if I don't take too long on the next few questions.
All right, you touched on this a little bit, but we've got, other than growing plants, how do you approach meeting other needs of pollinators like water and habitat?
Um, so, I mean, with water, you could have a fountain or something. We started with our pools because we dunk our plants in pools. One of the concerns with bees and other insects is that if you put a watering pool for them, they can drown. So I got these floating islands online, and yeah, there's different ones you can make. So you can have a cute little bird bath slash bee bath in your yard. Keep it topped up with water, and just have it also can just be a stone or something sticking out of the water, some island, so that insects don't drown. And it's been revolutionary since we put those in. We used to find dead insects in the pools, and if it was a bee, we'd be really sad, obviously, because we were trying to help them. And now it's very cute. You can see the bees drinking water, and they safely fly away. So thinking about that, I know butterflies, adult butterflies, male butterflies are known for their puddling. So that in that case, having exposed clay soil with a bit of water or depression there, or allowing a low area to fill with water when it rains, or you could just add extra water if you want to. They like to drink those minerals. Apparently, the male butterflies, I'm not sure if it's all species, but I've heard this used generally, that they kind of give when they with their when they fertilize the female butterflies, they also give a nutrient package with that, and that so that puddling, the drinking of the minerals, is given to their offspring actually. So it's really beneficial. So those are some examples. Not doing like excessive garden cleanup is really big. For example, leaf cutting bees, they make little packages basically with the leaves that they cut, where they lay their egg, and then that egg becomes a larva and feeds inside and then emerges in the spring. So leaving hollow stems of plants, not cutting deadheading at all, and just leaving, especially if there's bigger seeds, birds will eat those seeds in the winter. That can be a good food source. Yeah, leaving hollow stems for insects to overwinter in. Just being mindful that other individuals are using these plants, and that changing the mindset of like, I own this and it's mine and I can do whatever I want with it, to thinking, okay, I'm sharing this space, how can I be a good neighbor? That's kind of the shift of thinking. Yeah, next question.
All right, so we've got, which plants are the most in decline and would benefit from people growing them?
Everything really. I mean, it's pretty stark, like especially in the prairies. I say prairies as probably the prairies, it's on the Government of Canada website, is the most endangered ecosystem in Canada. support prairie species. Most of the grasses that we see on the landscape are not native grasses. Most of them are introduced intentionally or just spread over time, including lawn grasses. A study came out a couple years ago showing that the most prevalent grass in remaining grassland remnants is Kentucky bluegrass, the most prevalent grass in all sites that they studied. So that's huge. So that's a lawn grass. So even though that's $1 billion industry, the turf industry, that's also just spreading invasive species at the same time. And they're not regulated, but the impact is there. They're displacing native plants and taking their space. So anything, everything. It's just, I think prairies is big. Legumes, like, we do provincially, for folks coming, again, I'm more familiar with what's going on in Alberta. We do have different categories of ranks, so rare to S1, S2 being most rare, S3. We're not growing that many S1, S2, and sometimes an S1 plant is an S1 because it's at the tip of its range. Like the silkweed yucca is not endangered in North America, but is endangered in Canada because they're the tip of the range. Whereas other species like Oxytropis lagopus, I forget the common name, that species only occurs in a few populations in Alberta and Montana. That's it. It's extremely rare because there's not many of them. Now, I'm not selling that plant, but and I've had discussions with people about whether one should or shouldn't. I mean, it's a big thing. But anyways, I won't go there. But the thing is, it's like that's extremely rare. So I do think my argument, I haven't done it, but like I think a plant like that could be propagated because it's Oxytropis are pretty easy to grow, and it's a plant that loves growing in gravel. It grows on specifically, it's a pre-glaciation species that grows on certain areas that were left after glaciation, from my understanding. So it's really specific gravelly sites that it grows on that are left. And yeah, I think that would, anyway. So there's all these kind of ways of thinking about it. Like if people start propagating a more rare species, will that help that species continue if it can do well in a garden? Or is it unethical because a garden environment, once a house the private property gets sold, the next owner can get rid of those plants and that's not protected. So that's why it's really critical to have reserves and conservation areas or botanical gardens with the sole purpose of protecting that area. Because even within our garden, we don't own that garden perpetually forever. So what's going to happen to the rare plants that we put there? So there's a lot of different ethical concerns when we're thinking about rareness and what does that mean? And the Center for Plant Conservation has a course out. If you really, really want to deep dive on it, it's free. And it's really involved course, but it's free online about what to do with rare plants. And that's their whole purpose, is to support a North American rare plants. And it's an American organization, so they also support plants in Hawaii, where the American plants, like owned by United States territory, the most rare plants are all in Hawaii. There's plants that are endemic to those islands that are maybe it's only 100 individuals left in the whole population. So that's a whole other subject than what we're talking about. But just the idea, like there's a lot out there. So it's enough just to plant common grasses like blue grama grass and June grass, throw in some blanket flower, like some prairie crocus. Prairie crocus is a great example of a species that does not spread outside of native prairie. It's on the Center for Plant Conservation list as a species of concern, not currently endangered, but if the rapid decline in the prairies continues, which it is continuing every year, we're losing prairie every single year, eventually that species could become endangered because you will never see it just popping up in the middle of a roadside. That doesn't happen. So that's why it's so critical to consider if people can actually support that. And I've seen how beneficial prairie crocus is for early pollinators. I've seen funnel bees and several species of sweat bees in the spring on prairie crocus specifically. And if a bunch of people start growing that, then that's supplementing the wild populations that are not able to really continue, like outside of those where those boundaries are. That makes sense. So it's huge. I mean, just supporting the baseline prairie plants is huge. It's huge. Yeah. I've had feedback, someone saying from think it was Saskatchewan, they put in big blue stem, which was the dominant species of the tallgrass prairie, the most endangered prairie ecosystem left. There's less than 0.01% left. And she said she started seeing skipper butterflies that she had never seen before. That was on one of the courses I did. Someone told me. So yeah, you just bringing back some of these plants that were once dominant will help support the pollinators that depend on them. That's a long explanation. I know it's already 12:49. Megan, is there a lot of questions left?
There's a couple questions left. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going. I said 12:45, but I'll do last two and then that's it. Okay, because I know people came. I don't want them to lose the opportunity of having their question answered. Okay.
All right. We got a couple that are asking about underrated or unfriendly plants and how to include them in the garden.
Underrated, unfriendly. Like, I think nettle I already mentioned, and grasses. Like, grasses are not unfriendly, but people don't always think of them in an ornamental garden. They are the critical plants. They're the dominant plant species of prairie ecosystems. Many of them are facing declines because of competition, not only land use changes, but competition from invasive grasses. So that's a big one. And again, a lot of butterflies and moths lay their eggs on them, and some have very specific relationships. So supporting grasses is big. Nettle, I mentioned, people don't want to plant it because it stings, but it's a food, it's a medicine, you can make clothes out of it, and it's a specific host for butterflies. That's a win-win-win-win. So go for some of these guys. Some of the poisonous plants, excuse me, some people want them because they want to deter hares and stuff like that. Other people, so incorporating that, if you have little kids running around, or you're concerned about pets getting into something, absolutely, you may not be able to put some of these plants in. I understand that. So understand your own limitations, what your needs are for the garden. Those are still important, obviously, and work around that. There's different ways you can plan a garden. You can create barriers. If you don't want a dog going into a certain area where there might get, because I know needle and thread grass has seeds like foxtail barley that can dig into the fur of insects. I mean, at the end of the day, as pet owners, we need to be making sure that we brush our animals and make sure that there aren't this kind of thing when we go anywhere, really, if we're going into wild spaces with our pets. But because these grasses are all over the place, especially the foxtail barley, which is a native grass. But so just doing that due diligence is really important. Anyways, I'll leave it at that, and then because I can keep going. Last question, and then I'll let folks go.
All right. So our last one is, what do we need to know about soil health to grow native plants?
Soil health. So we always say use what you have. Don't put a lot of amendments in. If you can learn a little bit more of the history about your soil, that can be helpful. So what was done, like if it's an urban development, what was put in, and if you are able to get some of that information, that can be helpful. I also recommend, like, you can do basic soil tests. Like, there's ones where you put the soil in water and you see how much clay and silt and sand there is. So there's some tactile tests you can do with that as well. There's a word for it, soil. The word's escaping me right now, but you can Google it, like how to tell your mineral composition. So there's ribboning. Someone put it up. Thank you. Ribboning your soil. So there's things you can do to learn the basics. In terms of the microorganisms, unless you have the budget to pay for someone in a lab to look at it, that's one thing. But there aren't the same kind of tests out there, so it can be confusing. I don't always recommend just putting commercial. I don't recommend putting commercial mycorrhizal products out there in your soil because that's not native microorganisms to your area. Currently, there's no commercial product that I'm aware of that is specific to region, which it should be, because otherwise you're introducing microbes. And there's some preliminary research. I heard this from a researcher from the University of Lethbridge who focuses, she's a microbiologist working on soil. She said there's some preliminary research showing that potentially some of these introduced microorganisms are actually supporting weeds and not native plants, because maybe they evolved with those plants. I don't know why. Again, it's preliminary, but we may have the unintended effect if we're introducing microorganisms. So that's why it's so critical, I think, to just work with what we have. Don't use tons of amendments. Just try to keep, if you're making your own compost, keep it local to what you're using. And, the reality is everything is intermixing because of globalized environment and a globalized environment. If we're bringing in I'm just imagining we're bringing in an apple grown in Ontario, we put it in our compost, it probably has microorganisms on it that might, we may inadvertently, and I don't know, I mean, this is a very complex topic, but ultimately, yeah, just try to use what you have. And then, as I said, if you're struggling, like if your plant's not blooming, or it might be the location it's in, but if you know that it's a plant that associates with microorganisms, the closest area to you, if you can take a teaspoon of soil and inoculate your soil, like I specifically, I know prairie crocus, well, from my understanding, over 85% of plants associate with mycorrhizal fungi. And for some, it's very obligatory, it's very necessary, but for the majority, it's more nuanced than that. But anyways, ultimately, yeah, that's just a thought I've had. Like, I've had people say my prairie crocus isn't blooming. It could be because it's too much shade. I don't know, but it might be lack of microorganisms. So you could go to a nearby area where you're allowed to do it, I suppose, and just take a teaspoon and inoculate. You can experiment. We as I said, we do that here with some of our plants that we struggle growing just to support them. In theory, there should be something in your soil, but I know with highly disturbed environments, they can really degrade the food web of that soil. And again, it's extremely complex. So we're just doing the best we can without fully understanding what we're doing. But we're already doing a lot of damage as humans without understanding anything. So I think a little bit of these band-aid techniques to try and improve diversity may be helpful, but I'm only saying this experimentally. It's just what through experience, I'm trialing to try and troubleshoot some of the issues we're having. But I'm not a soil microbiologist, and it is a very complex subject. So does that kind of make sense? So just avoid adding a lot of random stuff. Just use what you have, and then rebuild your own soil, and put in native legumes to fix nitrogen rather than spraying fertilizer, stuff like that. Just basic common sense things. Just build up your own soil, allow the natural organic matter to help rebuild the topsoil over time. Things like that is my recommendation, rather than trying to bring in a bunch of different things that will continually alter an already altered landscape. That's my best guess. It's already 1 o'clock. Anyways, I think we're good. So thank you everyone so much for coming and for sharing your questions. I hope everyone's questions were answered. If not, feel free to shoot us an email or come visit us at one of the upcoming events. We'll also do City Saturday, Calgary, Edmonton. I didn't announce it, but it's all upcoming in March. So a lot of opportunity to connect with us and get your questions answered. So have a wonderful, wonderful week, everyone. Again, thank you so much. And we'll hopefully see you at the next session or at another event. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.